Hello, my name is Ollie Mancini. I'm a third-year acting student at the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts. I was able to assistant direct the second year's non-naturalism project in their production of George Buchner's Woyzeck. When starting this project, we were still in the middle of a nationwide lockdown due to COVID-19. This meant we didn't know if we were allowed a live audience. These restrictions eventually led us to the decision to create a film rather than a stage play. This meant we could utilise the camera to create an immersive professional recording rather than a live show recording, which would only be from a front-on wide shot of the stage. We took inspiration from the 1920s silent movie era and created a black and white, non-naturalistic, expressionistic film. Woyzeck as a text is very episodic and very Brechtian in style, which complements the non-naturalistic approach that this module is based on. The play has been interpreted in many ways over the last 100 years, from operas to musicals to naturalistic and non-naturalistic stage adaptations. Due to Buchner's fragmented scenes, it becomes something else altogether, a naturalistic tragedy, a damning social critique, a lower-class King Lear, a debate on free will and determinism. Hold it up to the light and it always takes on a different colour. Due to its unfinished episodic structure and our decision to create a film allowed us to work in an expressionistic style, and working in black and white further challenges our abilities as filmmakers and actors. In this video I will be talking about the different techniques that we used as well as our interpretation of the text, the challenges that we had to overcome and the outcome of our final edit. For the purposes of the video essay, I have re-edited the footage to further support the evaluation and information presented throughout. We took inspiration from films such as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu when approaching this project. This is evident in the black and white expressionistic makeup every character wears to highlight their face and contrast with the spotlights, and the clear and stylized, often exaggerated gestures and movements that the characters have to represent their emotions and thoughts through physical action. The expressionist actor would have to exhibit through physical unmasking and submission his own internal cosmic anxieties. From a technical point of view, we knew that we were going to be working in black and white, so the location and intensity of the lighting was vitally important to create this expressionistic aesthetic we are working for. We researched genres such as film noir to guide us through shooting in this black and white format. Noir's distinctive lighting does more than simply enhance realism and provide visual interest. It underscores the film's desire to thrill audiences with their own obliviousness. This scene, deep in the heart of nothing, represents some of these forms we were working with. You can see how the makeup contrasts with the lights and that we are only working with a bed and a pram to create the illusion of a room. We took inspiration from the German expressionist style by using a series of spotlights to highlight the action and pinpoint where we wanted the audience's focus to be. And the benefit of filming in a blacked out room enabled the area outside of the spotlight to be void of colour and light, as you can see in this scene. This lent itself to both a semiotic and symbolic style of shot. A sign stands for something which is not present, thus reinforcing the absence and metaphysical hollowness that haunt all signification. In this scene we were able to spotlight the bed and make it seem as if there was an eternity of darkness surrounding Marie. Although, in reality, we were in a small black box space full of actors, we were able to signify the illusion of total abyss. We also worked with the chiaroscuro lighting technique. Chiaroscuro fittingly evokes the post-war mulia, furnishing a backdrop for tales of psychological imprisonment whilst creating an atmosphere of claustrophobia and duplicity. This technique uses a low and high contrast of light in black and white to light up half the actor's face, giving an almost 3D effect to the shot. You can see this clearly in this scene, where we use two spotlights to highlight Marie's face, therefore creating a series of shadows in high contrast to the image of her face. We were also intrigued with the idea that most German expressionistic films are silent. And although we couldn't make Woyzeck a silent film, we kept a level of non-naturalism and distance by recording all the audio separately and having the actors lip-sync over their lines. This added a level of disconnection between the characters and their thoughts, and especially for Woyzeck, whose mind is so scattered anyway, added to the paranoia he was experiencing. We were also intrigued with playing around with the pace and intensity of the scenes, trying to maintain a level of urgency and the natural rise in action that the play has. And this scene, Show Me Your Room, Marie, allowed us to achieve some of these ideas. Although it's technically a rape scene, in rehearsals it came across in a slow, almost lethargic style. The dialogue, although very packed, is fairly conversational, so we discussed how we would keep the audience engaged and active throughout the scene. Much like the last scene we looked at, we were aided by the non-naturalistic makeup of the characters, and worked heavily on still image and gestures to visually express their inner and outer characteristics. You can see how the actors plant themselves, and then often over-articulate their words to get the clearest image possible. These groupings should make each moment so explicit in its social meaning as to enable the audience to read it without the assistance of the spoken text. Obviously, they are not speaking their words live, so they can work from a purely physical point of view. When talking about directing, Alexander McKendrick wrote that one of the tasks of the director as he transfers the screenplay to the medium of moving image with sound is almost to forget what his characters are saying and reimagine their behaviour as being mute so that all thoughts, feelings and impulses are conveyed to the audience through sound and vision, without speech. We worked with this idea and in this style for each scene to allow us to visually express the story without relying on the narration and the audio. This is the approach many of the black and white 1920s silent films would have taken, so we wanted to make sure to implement this in our reimagination. Again, like the last scene, as you can see, we used a spotlight on the bed to create a clear black and white contrast in the room, and the only point of focus in the scene is this bed. The rest of the room seems to disappear, so the attention of the audience is drawn to the action on the old, weathered bed. The bird's eye view of the bed further adds to the isolation that Marie is feeling as the Major begins to take advantage of her. This scene in particular touches on some of these themes and ideas of the male gaze, as well as behavioural stereotypes. Women then stand in patriarchal culture as the signifier for the male other, bound by a symbolic order in which man can then live out his fantasies and obsessions through linguistic command by imposing them on the silent image of a woman still tied to her place as bearer, not maker, or of meaning. This is a quote from Laura Mulvey's Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, in which she highlights how women can exist to be symbols for men to command and take advantage of. And in a male-dominated society, this role once given is incredibly difficult to break free from. This scene in its essence shows the Major forcing his way onto Marie to get what he wants. What's interesting is that Marie, although clearly not consenting to having sex with the Major, is aware of her lack of power and control in this situation, and eventually yields to the Major's advances, and simply says, "Oh, who cares anymore? No matter what way you look at it, we all get screwed in the end." At the end, we decided to use short clips to create a small montage of both Marie's face and the bed moving to convey the visual representation of sex without ever focusing on the action itself. In his manifesto, our toad describes how words say little to the mind, extent and objects speak, new images made with words, but space thundering with images and crammed with sound speaks too. In this scene, I had a dream last night. We decided to project images and spotlights from the front of the stage to create the illusion of crowds. As you can see, we used a single spotlight from the floor to create multiple shadows of people dancing on the cyclorama. This, mixed in with a short montage of drinking and dancing, creates a high-paced, energetic party scene full of people, where in reality there are only 7 actors on stage. The immediate and somewhat aggressive use of music, flashing lights and montage is very Artodian in style. Our toad wanted to disrupt the relationship between audience and performer. The cruelty in our toad's thesis was sensory. It exists in its work's capacity to shock and comfort the audience, to go beyond words and connect with the emotions, to wake up the nerves in the heart. The idea that actions speak louder than words, and through a series of images, shots and sound we were able to engage the audience with the same scene. Sound and lighting could also be used as tools of sensory disruption. The audience, he argued, should be placed at the centre of a piece of performance. Theatre should be an act of organised anarchy. Much like the theatre of cruelty, epic theatre and the ideas of Brecht also play a part in the script and in this scene. This is apparent in the archetypal qualities the characters in Woyzeck hold. These expressions of jest are usually highly complicated and contradictory, so they cannot be rendered by any single word, and the actor must take care that in giving his image the necessary emphasis, he does not lose anything, but emphasises the entire complex. The idea of not naming the characters, for example the Major just being called the Major, creates a level of distancing and allows for the archetype of his high-ranking, bullish and toxic nature to be recognised. The Major is very much driven by his sex drive and stands to directly contrast Woyzeck throughout the play. "I'm a man, do you hear me? I'm made of the stuff men are made of. That's steel." He's referred to by Marie as a real man, and Margaret describes him as a lion. Brett didn't want the actors to be the character on stage, only to show them as a type of person. The idea of a sadist is a constant concern for Woyzeck. "I think they're sadists and they take pleasure in watching our wretched lives unfold before them." And the Major engulfs all these qualities of a sadist. Sadism is a pleasure which does not presuppose harm to self. It is the inflicting of suffering on others. The Major and possibly the Captain are the focus of Woyzeck's paranoia, and this scene highlights that point and that divide. You can see the Major standing on the table at the centre of all the attention, explaining how I see what I want and I take it. Woyzeck is isolated and feels out of place. This isn't his desired environment. He's not a social person and has been taken away from the comfort that he feels on the hilltop. Our eventual decision not to have a live audience and to film the show allowed for us to further experiment in this scene with an immersive, non-naturalistic approach by utilising the point of view shot, which places the audience directly in the action. You can see in this scene we cut to the point of view from both Woyzeck and the Major when they are fighting to allow the audience to see both sides of the fight, rather than sticking with the mid-shot of the action. This created more of a personal connection with the characters and the action. The audience was placed in the bodies of both characters, removing them from a purely passive observation into an engagement with the scene we had created. One of the greatest assets we had in creating a black and white film was the ability to use colour and the importance that could play in a specific scene. Semiotics play a huge role when dealing with the idea of the colour red in Woyzeck. We associate red with the idea of hell and blood, and further associations of lust, sex, desire, anger and fire are symbolised by the colour red. Colour semiotics play a huge part in affecting our emotional engagement with theatre, both live and recorded, due to the immediate emotional and psychological reaction we are programmed to have. The simplest form being the idea that red and green are symbols for stop and go, yes and no. Artistically, we knew that we would use colour in one of the scenes, but it was deciding when the best place to use it was to create the best moment possible. We didn't want to overuse the colour or it would lose its value in the piece. We decided that it would have to be introduced in the climax of the action, which is the aptly named "a pretty red ribbon around your neck." Obviously, red is the colour we're going to introduce, so our challenge was to make it as impactful and memorable as possible. The result, as you can see, is a montage of clips with injections of both red screens and a bloody razor. The sharp and instant nature of the montage adds to the manic, psychotic act that Woyzeck is pursuing. This is very much his unravelling, and so we wanted to allow the audience into his mind as he's killing Marie. This is where we see different Maries at different stages of the play, dancing with the Major and seducing him in bed. The dancing contrasts perfectly with the killing, adding a layer of beauty and release to the murder. These images also have a subconscious semiotic response for the viewer. The audience begins discerning theatrical signs the moment a play begins, and in this case, throughout the film, the audience is breaking down and understanding these signifiers that we are putting in place. So when we get to our montage, these signs are a lot clearer. Although only half a second long, the knife fills the screen and so does the dancing. These images have associations in our brain, a knife linking with stabbing and murder, and the dancing linking with romance, intimacy and beauty. In addition, the seduction reinforces Woyzeck's necessity to end this mortal sin. Through a montage we can start to understand what Woyzeck feels and how he thinks. He talks about how his head's spinning, flashing behind my eyes. And through editing we were able to visually show what he's talking about. This sequence is also very Artaudian in style. A direct communication will be re-established between the spectator and the spectacle, between the actor and the spectator, from the fact that the spectator, placed in the middle of the action, is engulfed and physically affected by it. We've created this visceral and somewhat aggressive montage utilising some of the concepts of the theatre of cruelty to engage the audience with the climax of the piece. The idea that Woyzeck is trapped inside of his own brain inspired us to play around with projection, and with Woyzeck being trapped inside a screen with the walls closing in on him. The video we used as a montage of war videos, plane crashes, guns, injuries and peas to try and demonstrate the elements of PTSD and the inner thoughts Woyzeck was having. The scene is also set back on the hilltop, which we know Woyzeck has a special relationship with. This is where the voices speak loudest to him, and where he can escape reality. The only elements of control he seems to have in the play are when he is located on the hilltop. We also use Brecht's distancing effect when shooting from the point of view of Marie, forcing the audience to see the action through her eyes and inviting them to be affected and engaged with the scene, and subsequently the murder. Being able to work on Woyzeck and my research into technology in theatre has allowed me to gain a greater insight into how technology is being used in productions, and I've been able to examine why it works, how it works, and most importantly, when it fails. We managed to shoot the entire play using iPhone cameras and taking photos of the projected backdrops ourselves. And although we had certain LIFA resources available to us, we only needed one filming studio with a lighting rig and a projector. And from this we were able to create our filmed, non-naturalistic interpretation of George Buchner's Woyzeck. And on reflection of the finished product, we were able to meet the following artistic goals. We were able to create a world that highlighted the social and economic injustices that Woyzeck faces, whilst maintaining a level of expressionism and horror that was so prevalent in the 1920s silent movie era. Thank you for watching.